So as many of you are probably aware, some retailers will require that their vendors send a PO acknowledgement to not only acknowledge receipt of their order, but also to advise them whether or not the order line items can be fulfilled within their requested delivery window. And this is really critical for the vendors or for the retailers so that they can make adjustments if you're unable to meet their order requirements. So as part of your vendor compliance requirements, you as the vendor must return a PO acknowledgement, typically within a compressed time frame that starts once that PO has been sent from their system. So for those EDI customers that require a PO acknowledgement, the Pulse KPI has intelligence to know which customers actually do in fact require a PO acknowledgement. So there's really no guesswork as to which customer has this requirement. So again, as a PO is received into Gentran, the transaction is immediately visible inside of Pulse. As a transaction progresses in its fulfillment cycle, the Dynamics GP sales transaction attributes now become available. Pulse will provide visibility to whether or not the PO acknowledgement has been exported or if it has not been exported. Once a PO acknowledgement has been created and exported from Dynamics GP, we may assume that we've fulfilled that vendor compliance requirement. Unfortunately, as you may have already experienced, there is potential for a document to never leave your system, or worse, it may be transmitted, but for whatever reason, it's not received by your customer. So once a document is transmitted by Gentran, the compliance status is reported in real time. The compliance status ultimately displays whether or not your customer has received your document successfully, or if they have not, or if they've received it but they've rejected it because of errors. The compliance status is visible inside of the Pulse KPI. This is an immediate red flag in this case where we've got an overdue acknowledgement. So there was some sort of issue exchanging this document with a critical business partner, and with immediate visibility to these types of issues, your organization is now equipped to proactively respond to non-compliance issues before they are disruptive to relationships with your key customer accounts. Okay, so we're now going to fast forward to the fulfillment cycle. Your warehouse personnel, or possibly your third-party logistics firm, has fulfilled your customer order, and this customer requires an ASN. I'm going to migrate over to a dashboard that I've equipped here with KPI panels that are specific to logistics operations. As you are probably already aware, advanced ship notices, or ASNs, are commonly required as part of your EDI vendor requirements. The ASN document is absolutely critical for an efficient supply chain, and also at the same time a source of great frustration for many suppliers. The ASN advises the receiving party when a shipment is expected to arrive, as well as provides tracking information for that specific shipment. Probably the most important component to an ASN is that it includes the contents of the shipment, such as which SKUs and how many units are packed in each carton, and also how many cartons are on the pallet. The ASN also includes the GS1, or formerly known as the UCC 128 barcode, which is used to facilitate the receiving process at a retailer's receiving dock. As thousands of cartons are received daily, having the ability to scan a carton and validate that carton against the electronic ASN is absolutely critical for a retailer. The receiving party in this case doesn't have to open up and manually receive the ASN. So I provided you with a high-level overview of the criticality of the ASN document to your customers to provide some context as to why vendors commonly will receive poor vendor scorecards, and most importantly, why do vendors receive expense offsets or chargebacks when an ASN is not received. Other consequences of not sending an ASN or sending an invalid ASN includes your customer holding your shipment. And I've also heard of retailers completely refusing a shipment. So not only was revenue lost for the order, but the vendor in that case had to pay for freight to return the product back to their facility. I've even heard of stories where chargebacks were actually higher than the margin earned for a shipment. So understanding and maintaining compliance is absolutely critical. So how can Pulse help with maintaining a high vendor scorecard and also help with avoiding costly chargebacks for non-compliance? For those EDI customers that do require an ASN, the Pulse KPI has intelligence to know which customers do in fact require an ASN, and that way you can help avoid confusion as to when to create an ASN and when an ASN should be sent out to a customer. The Pulse KPI displays the actual status of the ASN for a particular sales transaction linked to an EDI customer. The intelligence behind the KPI includes reporting whether or not the ASN has actually been created in ASN Manager, whether that's done manually, whether it's done through a integration to vShip or through maybe your WMS system. And it also tells us whether or not that ASN has been exported and transmitted to your customer. Now, once an ASN has been created and exported from vSync's ASN Manager, we might assume that document was delivered successfully to our customer, but in reality, there is potential that that document may not get delivered for a number of reasons. So the compliance status is delivered in near real time inside of Pulse, which again defines whether or not your customer has received your document successfully or not. So if a 997 or a functional acknowledgement is not returned within the configurable threshold, and that's typically around 48 hours, the status will be set to overdue automatically. And that right there is an immediate red flag that there has been an issue exchanging a time-sensitive transaction with a critical business partner. And of course, as we know, there are consequences for not delivering the ASN. So with immediate visibility to these types of issues, your organization is better equipped to proactively respond to a non-compliance issue before that results in a disruption with your business partner, and also avoid shipments being held and of course the non-compliance chargeback fees. With the native dashboard functionality available in Pulse, again, I can group by a specific processing status. I can search for a specific document to find out, have I created an ASN, what's my shipment information, when did I send that ASN, was it acknowledged by my customer successfully. I can search through additional information to help me find a transaction, understand what's going on with a specific document. And again, I just have many different ways to slice and dice that data. So I wanted to take a moment and back out and show you some additional KPIs that I've added to my logistics dashboard, things that are specific to personnel and logistics operations of your business. So I've added some KPIs that are actually reporting information from our shipping system. In this case, I am displaying the number of unshipped orders for the day, so the number of shipments that need to be shipped before the end of today to meet my delivery requirements for my customers. I've also added a breakdown of spend by carrier to help me kind of measure, how much am I utilizing each additional carrier. It's something that can also be used for negotiating my rates with carriers. I've added spend by carrier service, and again, this just kind of helps me understand mode analytics. How often am I shipping ground versus expediting, etc. And then I've added a KPI here for picked orders by user, and this is actually pulling data out of my WMS system to really, this is more of a labor performance management type KPI. And there's many others. I just wanted to illustrate that Pulse can be utilized to provide a more comprehensive story of what's going on in your supply chain operations beyond just EDI. So, and the last thing I'll note, and I believe I mentioned this earlier, is that Pulse can be used for non-Accellos products as well. So any important KPI data that you would like to make available to personnel within your enterprise, Pulse can be leveraged as a tool to present that information. All right, so now at this point, we have completed the fulfillment cycle and delivered an ASN to our customer. So our next step in the order to cash cycle is to invoice the customer and process their payment. So the physical flow of materials is now complete. Aside from returns. Well, let's not focus on that for now. So we're crossing over into the financial supply chain processes. The EDI cycle starts with sending the EDI invoice, and then that's followed by the EDI remittance advice document. So as you're probably familiar with, any customer sending an EDI PO will typically require that their vendors also send an EDI invoice. And of course, many of the same challenges that we've mentioned earlier apply to sending invoices. So invoices have to be accurate, and then most importantly, they have to be delivered successfully to your customer, else they're not going to pay them. And based off of my experience, I can tell you that if an invoice is not sent to a customer, they're most likely not going to be knocking on your door to alert you that they can't process your payment. So most likely your accounts receivable team will quickly realize that an invoice has not been paid only after the payment terms due date have passed. So in this case, the task force is often assembled of different individuals from accounting, IT, sales, management, to determine why invoices were not paid and why there is a disruption to your cash flow ultimately. So if an invoice is in fact delivered, but the transaction is inaccurate, missing information, totals don't add up, etc., your customer's accounts payable system is going to reject that invoice, and then they'll send back an acknowledgement that will advise you that the invoice was received but rejected with errors. Ultimately, you are responsible for monitoring for any rejections, and if they are received, you must have visibility to those rejections and respond expeditiously to ensure your payment is received based on your terms and ultimately there's no disruption to cash flow. So how can Pulse help with eliminating these potential issues? For those EDI customers that do require an EDI invoice, again, the Pulse KPI will have intelligence to know which customers do in fact require that you send an invoice. Again, eliminate any confusion as to when to process an EDI invoice. The Pulse KPI displays the actual status of the invoice with intelligence behind the invoice, reporting whether or not the invoice has been sent, whether or not the invoice has been received by your customer successfully or not, and most importantly, whether or not you have been paid by your customer. So like other documents, when an invoice is sent, there is potential that that may never be delivered to their system, received by their system, and processed successfully. So if an invoice has not been exported, a visual cue is delivered to send those invoices to your customer. So let me pull up the processing status. Okay, so in this case, we have some invoices that we have not exported for whatever reason. So we can set a date range to identify any invoices with the date that has passed, but we haven't sent the invoice for whatever reason. For those that we have transmitted, the compliance status is made available here. Again, if we have any that were not received within the acceptable time frame, typically 48 hours, those will go to overdue, and that's an immediate red flag to investigate why these invoices were not received by my customer. Also, if an invoice was received for whatever reason, but they rejected it, say again the balance, the totals don't add up properly, we're missing a department number, we're missing their product SKU, they can't reconcile the difference, they will reject that invoice. Now, some customers may contact you via phone or email, but most likely they'll send you an EDI 997 with rejection, and that status will be displayed here. So again, anytime we have an invoice transaction with a status of rejected, that's an immediate red flag that we need to review this invoice, correct the issue, and resend back a corrected invoice so we're paid by the payment terms due date and there's no disruption to cash flow. So with the available dashboard functionality, we can look up a particular invoice to find the status, and we have all the additional information available to help with researching an issue or just validating that all invoices have been processed successfully. Back to the payment status, if we'd like to drill in and understand which invoices have not been paid, again, we're provided with a complete storyline of what's occurred with that specific EDI invoice transaction. We've also got some other more summary level KPIs that are available. So here we've set a KPI for just the total EDI invoice revenue generated within a specific time frame, and also we've broken down revenue across our customers in the EDI sales channel.